Hello, and welcome to my presentation on basically how do you get an Apple II Plus to run Appleworks at all. Um, the impetus for this particular session came from me as a 12-year-old kid when I got my first Apple II Plus. And back then, yeah, I didn't have any extra memory or anything, just had the 16K Apple card, um, and really couldn't run much of anything except the stock applications and games that would all fit in 64K. Um, at that time, it would have been 1984 when we received that particular secondhand Apple II Plus, which I still own today and will be showing here in a couple seconds. Um, yeah, that would have been about 12 years old at that time, fifth grade. And we started using Appleworks probably about seventh grade at that point in time, so once we got into junior high. And then also at that particular time, I was also helping the computer lab guy clean and refurbish the old Apple II Pluses that we had as well. But they already had a whole lab full of Apple IIes at that time, so that's what they were teaching Appleworks on. And back then, I believe we were using Appleworks 1.3 for most everything, but I couldn't run it at home, and that just kind of sucked. So later on in life, about 3-4 years ago, found this wonderful program called PlusWorks 2, which, lo and behold, allows us to actually run Appleworks 1.0 through 3.0 on an Apple II Plus with a few caveats. And those caveats essentially are that you have to have a minimum of 64K of RAM. So you have to have, well, say a minimum of 64K for the like 1.0 through 1.2. I think they can cram in now. And then you also must have an 80-column card with at least one of the shift mode options for your keyboard. The PlusWorks 2 software has other options for different clones as well. So like the Franklin Ace 1000 series, I believe there's also support for the 2000 series, also for the Laser 128 set as well. And then there is some support for the Apple IIe to give it access to extra memory cards. And that's one of the things I'm going to show here in a little bit as well, which is basically how I'm getting roughly, hopefully, 2 megs of RAM to show up in Appleworks 3 on an Apple II Plus. I'm going to run through a few different combinations that I worked out, and this has basically been, I know, a labor of love because I had to crack open essentially 50 of my last remaining new old stock floppies to go through all the permutations just to make sure things are right. One of the things you'll see coming up is the fact that this particular software requires you to do everything on disk 1, and it is floppy based only. And I'll cover a few more things as we go here in a second. So let me switch over and I'll get started on actually showing a little bit of the demo. Okay. All right, so you can still see me a little bit here. We'll see how this works. All right, so if everything is working correctly, you should be able to see a nice little LCD panel that just has a composite output of my Apple II Plus. I'll move this around. So here's my now ancient Apple II Plus from, to me, 1984. And a couple things it has in it right now. Let's see if we can get it in here. That is a Garrett's Workshop 128K Saturn card. And then it has an Applied Engineering Viewmaster 80 for the 80-column card. Slot 6 has the standard disk 2 with the 2 controllers. And then at the very back here, that is actually a Garrett's Workshop, essentially a 16 meg RAM factor card. But as I found out, it does not support the full amount of memory in any of these desktop spaces. It just can't. What I've basically found out is that you can basically get a maximum of 1 meg of Slinky RAM or RAM factor RAM as additional desktop space. It's like 1024 exactly on the 1.0 levels. 2.0 drops it back to like 1004. So it's still a lot of memory for an Apple II Plus, and the fact that it's running Appleworks of any sort, which basically just crashes if you try to run it normally without it. So what I kind of want to start with at present here is I'll take you through one of the packages, which is called actually PlusWorks 3, since I actually have that set up. See that, PlusWorks 3. And that's the last version that was released by the company, which was Norwich Data Services Limited. And it was meant for specifically Appleworks 3.0, and it's rumored that it can work on 4.0, but I have not found a floppy-based version of 4.0 that the installer actually will convert properly. So that's one of my to-do lists. But as far as converting 3.0 onto an Apple II Plus, that was kind of like my ultimate endpoint, since that's, at this point in time, the last version that has the support for macros and timeout and everything else that we've grown accustomed to. And eventually I'll actually install it to a hard drive of some sort, whether it be using the SmartPort DIY or possibly even FujiNet later on. We'll see how that goes. But without further ado, let me kind of show the process. So we're going to boot the PlusWorks 3 disk. And everything has to be exact, or else nothing works properly. So when it asks for the startup disk, if you blow any of these prompts and put the wrong disk in, you have to start completely over from Virgin Media. So with 3.0, basically any of these, once you modify them, you can't remodify them at all. You have to start over with blank floppies. All right, so let's put startup disk for 3 in, and I have a blank version of 3. So we'll do that. All right. And this requires several little bits of floppy shuffle here. We'll get that going. All right. So one of the neat things with 3.0 and also the previous version of it, which depending on which version of Appleworks you're using, will label itself as PlusWorks XM or PlusWorks 2. And since this is PlusWorks 3, these are the video cards that it does support, and it's a little bit less than the other. To select a video card, you have to hit the space bar to select. So you can't use the arrow keys, which is kind of different. So I'm using ViewMaster 80, select it. And then in this case, since I'm running a 128K Saturn card in slot 0 on the Plus, if I would only select it, down here, this the Titan Saturn Abacus. If I only selected it, and that's in slot 0, you only get one shot at a memory type. So you'd be limited to that. In that case, I'd be limited to 128K, and the desktop comes out to be like 108K when it's done. But since I want to use my RAM factor version, so the Garrett's Workshop floppy or card is actually, it's set in the 8 meg mode now, since it only has 1 meg, 8 meg, and 16 meg, I believe here. Yeah, and 16 meg mode for RAM factor. So when a 2GS, it sort of gets there. But it's a work in progress. But in this case, with version 3 of Appleworks, you can use basically up to 2 meg of RAM factor RAM, is what it appears to be. So we'll select that. All right, program will permanently monitor, or basically modify the startup media. And there's no option. So if you, like again, if you blow any of these points, you have to start over from the complete beginning with unmodified software. So now it's going to load Appleworks system. All right, now it goes into what do we do about our keyboard. So in this case, I have an Apple II Plus with the standard keyboard with the Shift key mod handled by the onboard Applied Engineering card. So we'll say 1, and then you hit Shift, if that detects it. It does ask about the printer driver patch, which is optional, and what it's for is basically for sending the 8th bit to your printer if you need it. The only printer that I have that would actually need it in some cases would be for some of the extra functions on the Okidata 82A in some cases. If you're using a dumb printer card, that's usually when it kicks in. Otherwise, yeah, or sometimes I found that if you use, say, the IBM PC block graphics modes and you embed them in Appleworks, and you send that to a printer, that would need the 8th bit set high to handle that kind of stuff. But I have not done that in a long, long time for testing. So I might say no. It tests out the 80 column display. So it's going to configure the memory driver, reset, and you only get one. So in this case, it's configuring for the RAM factor. And asking you, do you want to override the memory card firmware? And yeah, usually if you're using an accelerator or an Apple II memory expansion, a Slinky card, it's usually helpful to say yes or no. Otherwise, it's going to do an auto search via firmware to find the card and how much memory there is. So I'm going to override it anyway because it seems to work a little better, a little safer. And then you just basically tell it which slot is in. So mine's in slot 7. So it'll hard code that to look in slot 7 for the card. Installs the display driver. All right. And since this 3.0, we have startup, program, and then spreadsheet are the 3 floppies you absolutely need to make this happen. All right. So in this case, it's the word processor and database, which I have on this other floppy. And we will go ahead and get that modified. All right, configuration's complete. And then at this point, it'll reboot, but it'll stay in 80 column mode, or we can just do a hard reboot. So I am going to just do a hard reboot here. So everything turned off. All right, there we go. We're booting. And of course, it's because I left the program disk in. So let's do this correct. Do it one more time. And I've been having a little bit of problems with some of my other gear that I wanted to show, which were the Transwarp card with a 1.4 ROM on it, as well as my 13 megahertz card, the Ultra Warp. But apparently my Ultra Warp is now dead, and my Transwarp has issues accessing memory outside of itself. I can briefly show that too with some of the remaining time that I do have. So in this case, okay, it brings up, you pick your date. I'll say, we'll tell you, here's the 821, and down here you can see that it's running 2002 meg. So it did see 2 meg. Now what I don't know for this particular test is, did it actually properly bring the memory up? And one of the tests that I do is I bring up a word processor, new document, and if you can type a whole bunch of rows without it crashing, then the memory driver is actually doing its thing. So let's do the WP. So that's over here. Let's load that up. Need to insert some little music or something in here. But this is one of the benefits that you have, especially on the 2 Plus, that you have the extra RAM, is that you're preloading all the modules of Appleworks. And you can change that in the settings on your preloading settings as well. If you don't want to, if you only use word processor most of the time, or only use the spreadsheet or whatnot, you can just load the modules you want. So you don't have to mess around with loading everything and changing it. But the other good thing I mentioned before was that with version 3, you can actually install this to a hard drive partition, which I just have not done yet. But the important part is you have to do it from the floppy media to make the modifications to it first. Then you can copy the files over and then boot up. All right, so it's gonna get in there. Now we have Appleworks running. So let's add a word processor file and see if we crash and can use the actual 2 meg that it found. Okay, from scratch. Test name. All right, let's go here. And right now, the way this video works, it fits on the screen sorta, so I had to cut off like the top line. So there isn't, that's the normal status line at the top. But the idea is hopefully this doesn't crash by the time we get the ability to scroll. And if we get that far, I'm gonna do a bunch of stuff. This generally means, yes, it did actually work. All right, so there you have it. You've got Appleworks 3.0 running on an Apple II Plus with 2 megs of desktop space, which I think is pretty cool for a machine that was never meant to run this at all. So let's go back and I can take you through a couple other configurations we got here. So let me get back out of this, escape. Do the 6th quit. And then we're out. All right. Put my blank. Okay, so from this point, I've got some preloaded versions here, but we'll have to, let's see, show how to do this real quick. So I can show an Appleworks 2, but we'll have to rearrange a few things since these disks are configured a little differently. So in this case, I'm going to take the Saturn card and put that in slot 7. This will be a nice showing for those that don't have all the extra memory. And I do actually have a regular, this is a 16K Applied Engineering Pocket Rocket, which is basically just another 16K card that doesn't require you to remove the chip from the motherboard that the normal Apple card does. All right, so we'll do that. Okay, then I have a set of disks that lets me set this up correctly. All right, so we need Appleworks 2.0 startup, 16K slot 0, 128K slot 7. And I basically labeled the floppies in order to keep them straight of what particular requirement it's set up for. So we'll go ahead and boot that startup disk. And we'll see a downgraded version of basically Appleworks 2 running on essentially 128K plus the 16 of the Pocket Rocket and the motherboard RAM, which gives you 124K of desktop space, which still isn't bad. You can do a lot of typing with that amount of space. So let's go ahead, put the program disk in. Yeah, same thing. It's Appleworks, it's Appleworks. All right. So again, 124K available. We'll go see if this, whoops. We'll go back out. 3, I do that again from scratch. And pretty much with Appleworks, I've found that it is very, very fragile when it gets to its memory spaces. And it will do crazy lockups and do all kinds of weird things. So if you get stuff scrolling like this, look at that, hey, we're good. So the memory took, and it's all configured. So in this case, what it would do is it would use 16K of the 128K Saturn card in slot 0, and then it would use the full, the 16K out of slot 0 and the full 128K in slot 7, and then the motherboard RAM. So that's what gives us that 124 at the end. All right. So that is that combination. And let's see here. We'll go back to here and grab the very earliest version of Appleworks if you happen to do it. And again, that's going to be a 1.2, which is the earliest I could find images for. And that's another thing I kind of want to bring up about this process too, is that the version of the media you use to modify is very specific. So it took me probably 6 months to find a working Appleworks 3.0 floppy set that wasn't somebody's archive edition that was unopened. It turns out that apparently in my collection, I didn't have a version of it either when I looked. But then several months later, I found 6 different copies buried in my other collections from other friends. But at least online, there are no working images of 3.0. Because if they're modified in any way, say like 3.01, 3.02, this package for PlusWorks 3 will not modify it. So again, okay, so this time, instead of 124K, we have 136K. And again, it's an earlier version of Appleworks. But you still have lots of memory to use if you have, simple cards. And when I did the testing earlier today, playing around with the, let's say, this guy. So a real Apple Slinky at 1 meg, as well as the Garrett Workshop, basically 8 meg. Well, it says 8 meg RAM for Apple II, but it actually has 16 meg RAM factor support. How close I can get there. But it will, for Appleworks 1.0 through 1.3, as well as 2.0, it will only see 1 meg of the memory, whether it's the Slinky or the RAM factor version. But in 3.0, you actually get access to the 2, as we saw when we modified that directly. So we'll go back through here. All right, good enough. 3. And drops this in. And just the fact that you get, usually once you get past the 5th line, your system is pretty stable. And I really wish I had the Ultra Warp 13 megahertz card working, and or my Transwarp. I could show the Transwarp at 4 megahertz, but it's just the same. You get, in this case, you get a little bit less memory because it basically only sees the extra 64K of the onboard memory onto the Apple II Plus that it would normally would. And you can only expand it via that. At least my card apparently can only access itself. It won't actually access any other memory card. It used to. So I'm wondering if something is actually degrading over time on my Transwarp card. I tried it with both the 65C816 upgrade that's supported by the card, as well as a normal 65C02. And no difference. There's just something degrading or dead now. I'm not sure what killed them. So I'll get those fixed. All right, so we have that, and there we go. So that's working very well. All right, so with that, I kind of want to, go back to end this up real quick and basically say that I will provide some links to the images that I found online for the PlusWorks 3, the PlusWorks 2 packages that I used and can verify, as well as I'll be uploading images of all of my Appleworks versions as a kit, as well as the Virgin Media images that I used and modified. That way you guys can do it a little bit easier. Yeah, why not spend the 150 some hours that I've put in over the last couple of years trying to figure this all out. it turned into a giant Excel sheet at one point with all the different permutations of RAM card, size, version of Appleworks, which machine it was in. Because I've also done some work on the Apple IIe side as well, which now I got to go back and redo since the current ultra warp and transwarp situation I have is kind of messed up. And that's one thing that's nice about the transwarp and the ultra warp is that, well, at least for the ultra warp, it's still manufactured and it actually works in an Apple II Plus. The other accelerators that are on the market still only work in Apple IIes and above. So yeah, they're nice cards to have when they're working. So apparently mine died, but yeah, I'll include a bunch of links as we go along with the conference, and make sure you guys have all the different packages you need to do this. But there you have it. You can actually run Appleworks on many different versions on an Apple II Plus that really shouldn't be running it. So thank you so much, and have a great conference.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did mostly work with Appleworks 3.0, and I noticed that your work with the 2 Plus involved earlier versions. Are there any advantages of the earlier version which they might have dropped out when they made up the later versions, you know, maybe to make up some memory or something?
Well, to start off with, even though I spent so many hours with these different versions of things, I'm still not an Appleworks expert by any means, but I can say that at least for the 2 Plus, the 3.0 seems to be the sweet spot, because that's when you start picking up a lot of the full macro ability that started coming out with the timeout macros, ultra macros, and whatnot. And those were where they, I guess in 4.0 is when they started becoming built in. So 3.0 is kind of like that sweet spot. In the 1.x and 2.0, you start getting what seems to be just better memory handling, to be honest, from what I've seen. So 2.0 is just more of a stable product. But still, I'd say 3.0 is kind of where I'm going to probably leave my machine. And the other benefit of going with 3.0 is that you can't actually put it on a hard drive. So that'll be where I'll probably start, I guess, building it for the smart port devices, and then see if I can get a smart port driven Apple II Plus with AW3.
Thank you. We have another question from Rockhurst.
Hello, this is Dave Slaughter.
Hey.
Actually, I have two questions for you. The first one is you mentioned Garrett's memory cards. I very quickly Googled Garrett's workshop and found a website, attendee.com, and an eBay.
Yes.
Does he actually still make these cards and produce them?
I really wish he did. And it's one of those cases where he would if he could, and he's getting really close. Because apparently what happened was before, like, I guess right after he sent me the cards to actually do some testing for him on them for the designs and compatibility, especially with his Titan card, the Titan 128, and then later the 8 meg card for the RAM Factor / Slinky. Because apparently the Slinky ROM is one of the harder ones to actually emulate, at least according to him. But it works. But what happened was apparently his pick and place machine that they use basically died, and they're waiting on parts to get it fixed. And as soon as they get their production facility, which is all in-house apparently, back up and running for these batches, they will put them back up for sale. But right now, basically, due to the chip shortages and other issues, they're having major issues getting their machinery fixed.
Oh, I know very well about those shortages. I offer for the Raspberry Pi single board computers, and
yep.
The prices for those have shot up.
Yes.
So the second question is, I noticed an HT in the background of the video. Are you an amateur radio operator?
Yes, KI5 AHL. I've been licensed. I'm still only technician licensed, but I got that in 2018. So I still play.
Okay, KI5AHL. This is W3DJS. Good to meet you.
Yeah, excellent. 73s, man.
Sorry.